Billionaire pretends to be blind. What happened will leave you speechless. Richard Williams was a man whose name rang like thunder across Nigeria. In the bustling streets of Lagos, on the polished marble floors of Abuja's high offices, in oil boardrooms in Port Harcourt, his shadow loomed. He was 46 tall, commanding, and one of the wealthiest men in Africa. His empire stretched from oil and gas to real estate banking and even the rising tech sector. Newspapers often described him as a lion of Lagos, a man who could buy influence with the same ease others bought a meal of jollof rice. Richard's fortune was not the kind you stumbled upon. It was the kind you carved with blood, sweat, and a vision sharper than a blade. But all his business triumphs, all his power and glory, seemed pale in comparison to his most prized possession, his wife, Catherine. Catherine Williams was the definition of elegance. Slender, golden-skinned, with eyes that sparkled whenever she stepped into a room, she was the envy of every woman and the desire of every man. Fashion magazines across Africa adored her style, calling her the Diamond of Lagos. Whenever she appeared at charity galas or political dinners, whispers always followed, some praising her beauty, some jealous of her good fortune. Richard loved her fiercely, with the kind of devotion men rarely gave when they had the whole world at their feet. But beneath the glitter and champagne, cracks slowly formed in the perfect picture. Cracks that no one could see, not even Richard himself, until fate tore open his life. It happened on the night of September 12, 2025. Richard had just finished a tense dinner meeting with government officials in Abuja. He drove back in his bulletproof Range Rover, flanked by security cars, his driver navigating the expressway at high speed. The rain had just ended, leaving the road slick. Out of nowhere, a truck carrying cement lost control, veering into Richard's lane. The crash was loud, metal grinding against metal, glass shattering into deadly rain. The convoy scattered, horns blaring. Richard's car spun, slammed into the barriers, and darkness swallowed him whole. When he woke in the hospital, the room was cold and filled with beeping machines. His body ached, his head throbbed, and the world around him was blurry. The doctors explained that the accident had shaken his optic nerves. His vision was weak, clouded, and could vanish completely if not handled with care. They were hopeful he would recover in months. But for now, the mighty Richard Williams was nearly blind. The news spread across Nigeria like fire. Newspapers carried headlines. Billionaire Richard Williams loses his sight in fatal crash. Social media buzzed with pity and speculation. Politicians sent flowers. Business associates sent gifts, and Catherine stood at his side, weeping for the cameras, her hand wrapped around his as though she would never let go. To the world, she was the loyal wife, the perfect partner. But Richard, in his hospital bed, made a decision. He realized something in those blurred hours. He could still see. Not well, not perfectly, but enough. The doctors were right. He might recover. But instead of revealing this truth, Richard told everyone he was blind. He wore dark-tinted glasses, moved carefully, and pretended to depend on others. Only a handful of his most trusted staff knew the secret. Why would a man like Richard pretend to be blind? Because whispers had reached him. For months, quiet rumors followed Catherine. Some said she met someone when Richard was away. Some said another man was enjoying the attention that should have been her husband's. Richard always dismissed it as envy, as gossip fueled by his enemies. But now, with the world convinced he was blind, he saw a perfect chance to test her loyalty. Back at his Banana Island mansion, Richard lived like a blind man. Catherine led him around the house, spoke softly, and smiled for the cameras when journalists came to check on his health. At night, she read to him in bed. She seemed devoted, almost saintly. But Richard noticed the small cracks. She sometimes left the room late at night, whispering on her phone. She often smelled of a perfume he had never bought her. She disappeared for hours in the afternoon, claiming to visit her cousin in Lekki. Richard said nothing. He played the helpless husband, moving slowly, letting her believe she was safe. But in truth, he was watching. One evening, when she thought he was asleep, she tiptoed out of the room in a silk dress, car keys jingling softly. Richard rose quietly, his blurred vision straining, and followed her to the garage. From a dark corner, He saw a Mercedes roll out. She did not return until dawn. When he asked where she had been, Catherine kissed his cheek and said she spent the night with her cousin who was unwell. Richard nodded, face calm, though inside his heart beat like a drum. There was one man Richard trusted more than anyone, his twin brother, Edward. Though identical in face, they were opposites in life. Richard was the tycoon, the fighter, the lion of Lagos. Edward was a quiet scholar, a historian who taught at the University of Ibadan, far removed from business and politics. They shared a bond forged in childhood, a bond Richard thought nothing in the world could break. When Richard confided in Edward about his suspicions, Edward seemed troubled. "Do you want me to follow her?" he asked. Richard shook his head. "No, if there is betrayal in my house, I want to see it myself." Weeks passed. Catherine's lies grew bolder. Sometimes she left home dressed in ways Richard had never seen her before. Short dresses, new jewelry, perfume that smelled of desire. She became careless, thinking her husband's blind eyes could not catch her. Richard's chest grew heavy with dread. The night came when his world cracked open. He returned from a hospital appointment earlier than expected. As he entered his mansion, the house was too quiet. Moving slowly, he climbed the stairs to the master bedroom. His heart pounded as muffled laughter reached his ears. Laughter that was intimate, familiar, wrong. He pushed the door open. His blurred vision sharpened for one cruel moment, enough to show him a nightmare. Catherine was not alone in their bed. Another man was with her, his hands on her, their bodies entangled in betrayal. Richard's breath caught, his knees weakened, but the face of the man made the pain 1,000 times worse. It was Edward, his twin, his own blood. For a moment, Richard thought the accident had broken his mind, that he was hallucinating. But when Catherine gasped and Edward's face turned pale, the truth was undeniable. His wife and his brother. Together, Richard closed the door without a word and walked away. The next morning, he summoned them to the library. He removed his dark glasses, letting them see his eyes. "I can see," he said quietly. "I have always been able to see." Silence crushed the room. Catherine stammered, tried to explain, tears running down her cheeks. Edward lowered his gaze, shame written all over his face. "How long?" Richard asked, his voice steady like steel. Edward whispered, "Months. When you were always away, it just happened." "You betrayed your brother," Richard said, his voice cold. He turned to Catherine. "And you betrayed your husband. For what? For comfort? For greed?" Catherine fell to her knees, sobbing, begging for forgiveness. Edward mumbled excuses about loneliness and temptation. But Richard was unmoved. His heart, once open to both of them, was now a fortress of stone. The story leaked to the press. Within days, headlines screamed across Nigeria. Billionaire Richard Williams betrayed by wife and twin brother. Social media exploded. Memes, scandals, gossip shows. Everyone feasts on the fall of the perfect couple. Catherine, once adored, was shamed in public. Edward's reputation as a scholar crumbled. But Richard had one more card to play. In his months of pretending to be blind, he had uncovered more than just infidelity. He had found bank transfers, documents, and recordings that showed Catherine and Edward had been siphoning money from his empire. What began as an affair had grown into a conspiracy to weaken him, to carve away his fortune. In court, Richard exposed everything. Catherine was stripped of wealth and glamour, left with nothing but scandal. Edward was disgraced, his career destroyed, his name cursed. Richard stood before the cameras one final time and said, "In this life, the greatest blindness is not of the eyes. It is the blindness of trust. I pretended to be blind, and I saw the truth. I saw a betrayal deeper than sight could ever show. And I have learned loyalty is worth more than gold." The world was stunned. The Lion of Lagos had been wounded, but not destroyed. Richard rebuilt his empire, stronger than before. But the scars of betrayal never left him. Behind his wealth and his power, his heart carried a wound only truth could carve. And to this day, Nigerians still whisper of Richard Williams, the billionaire who pretended to be blind, and the betrayal by his glamorous wife and his own twin brother, a story so shocking that no one saw the